Hi, good morning everyone, and welcome to the second of our two strategic cereal farm results webinars. So today we're going to be talking about the strategic cereal farm North results. My name is Henny, I work in the agronomy and knowledge transfer team, and I oversee the strategic farm network. So today we're going to hear from our host farmer, David Blacker. We're also going to hear from AHDB, our research partners, and we're going to be talking through the results from the 2025 harvest year trials. Just a bit of housekeeping before we kick off. The webinar is being recorded, so if you do need to drop out or if you want to catch up with it afterwards, then it will be available on YouTube after the event. Our speakers are going to keep perfectly to time, so there will be plenty of time for questions at the end. So if you do want to ask a question, please make sure you pop it in the kind of question box. In there, we'll make sure we've filled all of your questions. If we don't have time to cover them all in the hour that we've got, then I'll make sure that they're followed up with you afterwards. So yeah, I really do encourage you to get involved and ask any questions that you might have. Most of you, I'm sure, are fairly au fait with the Strategic Farm Network. Go to the next slide, please, Maya. But for those of you who perhaps haven't heard about them or don't know exactly what they are or what they do, these strategic farms are an opportunity to put research into practice on commercial farms across the UK. We partner up with a host farm such as David's, and we tend to stick with them for roughly 6 years. Across those 6 years, we host a number of field and farm scale trials, demonstrating sort of practical research on a commercial farm, and partnered up with research partners like AHDB, NIAB and universities as well. So it's an opportunity to do scientifically robust on a commercial farm setting. We then share the results from these trials via on-farm events in the summer, and also sometimes in the winter, and then we also have these webinars and annual reports produced every year. So it's a really great opportunity to get farmers engaged with research and also to have researchers working with farmers at a sort of field and farm scale. Next slide, please, Maya. So at the moment we have 3 strategic farms. So today we're going to be hearing from David Blacker, but we also have David Jones, who's based in the east at Morley, and we also have Will Oliver, who's just joined us in the Midlands as well. Next slide, please. So at these strategic farms, we cover a whole range of different research topics. So today we're going to be hearing about micronutrients and crop health, boosting earthworms, and also talking about drainage and the effects on soil health and crop performance. But across the strategic farm network, we also look at cultural weed control and weed seed bank management. We look at nitrogen use efficiency. We look at optimizing organic amendments, using decision support tools to control BYDV alongside varietal selection. And we also are looking at things like maize management and the effects on following wheat crops. So a really diverse range of topics that we cover. Next slide, please, Maya. And so if you do want to find out more about the Strategic Cereal Farm Network, each of the farms has their own webpage, which then has links to their annual reports. Like I said, we have on-farm meetings every year. We also have a YouTube channel, which has a whole range of videos from each of the strategic farms. So if you go onto the AHDB website and search for the Strategic Cereal Farms, you'll find all of the information there. Next slide, please, Maya. So I'm going to start off by handing over to David Blacker just to give a bit of an overview of the cropping season, the good, the bad and the ugly, and how he sort of found working with these trials for the past season. So over to you, David.
Yeah, I'm David Blacker. I've got a 500-acre arable farm up in Yorkshire, just north of York, largely clay loam soils. Rotation based around winter wheat, using rape and beans and stewardship as break crops. And yeah, we've had a couple of difficult years up here. Last year was quite challenging getting, if you didn't get things established last year before middle of September. Yeah, we had a really nasty spell of rain at the end of September that really parked everything for me for 2-3 weeks. So quite a lot of my crops last year were late drilled, and then obviously came into a drought this spring, and the year before that was just as bad because it was so wet. It just never stopped raining right through the season last year. But we didn't have any septoria last year, so that was a little saving, that little golden nugget we're clinging on to. Back to you, Henny.
Perfect. Thanks, David. I'm sure that many other farmers can relate to the challenging season that you've just described. So I'm now going to hand over to Charlotte from ADAS, who's going to talk us through the first work package. So over to you, Charlotte.
Thanks, Henny. If you could move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this past year, we had 3 different work packages on the farm. So we're all headed up and led by Anne Bogle, who couldn't be with us today. But I've been working on the foliar micronutrients and their impact on yield and disease. Then Anne was looking at improving earthworm populations, and Kate Smith was looking at the drainage trial. All of our tramline trial designs and yield map analyses were done by Susie Rokes. The disease assessments were looked at by Chloe Morgan, and David Motley at High Mothorpe has been heading up as the site manager. So we've been working as a real team on farm. Next slide, please. So to start off, we'll look at the foliar micronutrients work package, which was performed on Overton 4. Here you've got the trial design. The objective of this was to test active management foliar nutrition against a farm standard nutrition, looking at the impact on yield and disease. We also had a reduced fungicide treatment, which created a higher disease pressure, which would better test the effects of nutrition on disease control. It was a second winter wheat. And so we had those 2 nutrition treatments and 2 fungicide treatments. So you can see the active management in yellow, the farm standard in the green, and then the hashed areas had a nil fungicide applied. So we had 12 double tram lines to allow replication within the field. Next slide, please. The treatments, you can see the treatment dates there. So some of the manganese sulfate was essentially applied to all the nutrition treatments. And then we had the foliar nutrition applications just to the active management. These are all foliar applied micronutrient products from Yara that contain a number of different micronutrients, and they were applied following tissue testing. Then we also had a basic standard fungicide program, and because it was a really low disease pressure year, the reduced fungicides ended up being nil fungicides. Next slide, please. So we looked at the grain nutrition data from the previous year in that field, and it showed deficiencies in nitrogen, sulfur, calcium, and molybdenum, with nitrogen and sulfur being the main concerns. We already started out understanding that the crop was likely to be deficient in these nutrients, and we took some tissue tests, and these are the results here. So the highlighted cells are those that are below the historic yen yield enhancement network, lower quartile ranges, so they're likely to be low. So it was manganese, molybdenum, phosphorus, and potassium, showing that these might be, we needed treatment for the crop. And although we hadn't applied any treatments yet, we did separate them out just to see if there were any differences between the averages. If you could press next, please. Thank you. We also looked at vegetation indices throughout the season. So we have the normalized difference red edge in the first column, and then the normalized difference vegetation index in the second column at growth stage 30. There were no statistical differences between the two treatments at this point in time, but you can see that the active management tended to have a smaller or lower green biomass compared to the farm standard before we'd applied any nutrition treatments. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we applied some nutrition, foliar nutrition, and then we gave that a chance to be taken up by the crop, and then we took some more leaf tissue results so that we could actively respond to what was happening in the crop at the time. And you can see, if you look, that we have a response to the applied nutrition where manganese and molybdenum, zinc, sulfur have all statistically increased in the active management areas compared to the farm standard. However, we're still slightly low in phosphorus and potassium. Next, please. Thank you. So here we have continued with those vegetation indices, and we've split it. I've split this out slightly, so it's a little bit more difficult. But we have the farm standard and active management nutrition in the first column, and then you have the farm standard and nil fungicides. And what this is showing is that there were no significant difference between the treatments in green biomass by those P values in the lower 3 rows. But you can see still that that active management is still slightly lower, showing a slightly lower trend for lower green biomass across the field. Next, please. Thank you. And then we took a final leaf tissue result after the second application of foliar nutrients. And again, we can see that we're tracking and seeing that response in the crop. So you have statistically higher values for manganese and zinc in the crop following those nutrition applications. The farm standard is now showing deficiencies in those nutrients. Copper has now appeared as something that perhaps should be looked at or treated, and we're still showing the deficiencies in phosphorus and potassium on the field. If you press next, please. Thank you. So again, we have those vegetation indices results at growth stage 75, and here you can see that the fungicide or the nil fungicide treatment is having a lower green biomass, and this was a statistical difference. There were no statistical differences in the nutrition and there was no interaction between the fungicide and nutrition picked up by the vegetation indices. But here you can see that the active management that had previously been lower compared to the farm standard has now caught up. And although those differences aren't significant, the trend has slightly switched at this point in time. Next slide, please. So looking at the disease effects, we have the green leaf area results for leaf 2 and leaf 3 and leaf 4 in this table. We also have septoria results and yellow rust results. And you can see that there were some significant differences where the active management has increased green leaf area and reduced disease at growth stage 39. And these were statistically significant results. Next, please. And this benefit continued through to growth stage 75, so you have particularly under no fungicide. So this lower table has been split into the standard fungicide set and the no fungicide set, and there are a significant increase in green leaf area and reductions in yellow rust from the active management, and this is more significant under the nil fungicide areas of the field, and this is probably because disease pressures were lower and so not showing up in the standard fungicides as much. Next slide, please. So these are the yield results. You have the processed yield map using the agronomics software developed by ADAS. And you can see the lower yielding areas in red and orange and the higher yielding areas in blue. And on the left, we have yield results. So these yield results are not yield themselves, they're yield differences. And each bar is a comparison of treatments. So let me walk you through it. We have the fact that active management has given a yield benefit over the farm standard at standard and nil fungicides. So the first green bar is active management at standard fungicide compared to farm standard nutrition at standard fungicide. So it's an increase, but because the confidence interval bar crosses the 0 line, it's not statistically significant. The next green bar is the active management at nil fungicide versus the farm standard at nil fungicide. And this was a significant increase in yield. If you press next, please. And then we have the comparisons of the fungicides. So this first blue bar shows standard fungicides at farm standard nutrition compared to nil fungicide. So you can see that standard fungicide with standard nutrition gave a yield boost compared to nil fungicides. And then the final blue bar shows the standard fungicide at active management compared to nil fungicides at farm standard. So again, showing a yield increase. But standard fungicides gave a yield benefit over nil fungicides for both nutrient treatments. And that's, I don't think, very surprising, but useful to see. Next slide, please. We have also looked at the gross margin effects. So active management improved gross margin under nil fungicides. So these rows correspond to the bars in the graph that was just demonstrated. So the active management benefit standard fungicide was not an improvement on gross management, it was -£6. Whereas the active management benefit at nil fungicides gave an increase on gross margin at £59. In the columns here, you have the extra income from the yield boost and any additional costs. So with the active management, that includes the cost of the fungicides, a single tissue test, and any applications as well. If you press next, please. So then we look at the next set of comparison treatments. So the full fungicide benefit at standard nutrition gave the highest increase in gross margin, so that's £237. And then the full fungicide benefit with active management at £171. So with standard fungicide, the yield benefit of active management didn't justify the costs, and gross margin was highest with standard nutrition and fungicides. Next, please. So the conclusions from work package 1 are that active management approach for nutrition can improve disease tolerance, which is a really neat finding, but the disease reductions can't replace simple fungicide programs, even in a dry year with low disease pressures. The yield benefits of active management may not cover the cost of tissue testing and the foliar nutrients, but the benefits could be greater if testing and applications had begun earlier or in a season with higher disease pressures. So we hold our hands up that we perhaps could have been faster at reacting and applying those the active management principle to the trial. So this is something we're going to look at again. So we have a new set of work package 1 trial for next year in winter beans on new farm 4. Next, and then I think I can hand over to Henny.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Charlotte. Yeah, that was really interesting to see them all compared, and obviously gross margins being a particularly important thing for a lot of farmers. It's really key that we put those costs against those different treatments. So yeah, thank you for covering all of that in such great detail. So now I'm going to hand over to Kate Smith, who has warned us that she does have a bit of a cold, so you're going to have to bear with her if she just starts coughing and spluttering. And Kate is going to be covering work packages 2 and 3. So over to you, Kate.
Oh, thanks, Henny. I'm presenting this work package on behalf of Anne, who can't make it today. As part of work package 2, we were looking at ways to improve earthworm populations, and the background to this is that in the first year, when carrying out the baseline soil health and earthworm assessments, it was clear that earthworm populations across the farm really were depleted, with 2 to 7 worms being counted in a 20 centimetre pit of soil, and no evidence of adults. They were mainly, juveniles, and there were no deep burrowing or anesic worms. In comparison, a good population would be more than 9 worms within a pit and would consist of both juveniles and adults. So in this year, we were looking at 2 treatments to increase earthworm populations. So basically looking at ways of getting organic matter into the soil. So the first being a permanent clover understory, and then the second treatment being compost. And we were going to look at the impact on both earthworm populations, soil nitrogen supply, and crop performance. So this was carried out in Newton 1 field. The crop this year is winter wheat, and you can see the treatment list below. We had a control with the crop only, so just winter wheat with no compost applied. And then we had the one half of the field, which you can see shaded in that sort of hatched colour, was where we applied compost, and then the other half of the field didn't have any compost. And that compost was applied at 25 tonnes per hectare fresh weight in July. And then the legume understory was drilled a few days later, and you can see that the tram lines were indicated by the green colour where the legume understory was drilled, and that was King's living mulch mix that was drilled on those plots. And that consisted of yellow trefoil, white clover, subterranean clover, and a small leaf clover. Next slide, please. So this slide summarises VES and earthworm counts that were carried out both in 2023 as part of the baselining activities, and then again this year in February. Looking at the VES score, so that's the visual evaluation of soil structure, we can see that the scores are not much different from what we recorded in October 2023. The values here are the least limiting the limiting layer, sorry. So it's where we recorded the highest scores, and this is where we picked up a layer of compaction at around 10 centimetres in October 2023. In February, that compaction that was still there to some extent, but it was slightly deeper at 16 to 20 centimetres. And it is a bit more clearer where compost hasn't been applied on those scores, really. So, and then moving on to the earthworm scores. Again, no real differences between 2023 and 2025, and really there are no clear treatment differences between those between the earthworm numbers, which range from say 3, indicating that the field was depleted of earthworms, up to 10 was the maximum number of earthworms that were recorded. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is soil mineral measurements that were recorded in August 2024 and again in February 2024. And one of the first things that you can see is that the soil mineral contents are quite similar in August and February on that legume understory. But where we've applied, but where there is no legume, the SM values are generally higher by about 25 to 40 kilograms of N per hectare. Go to the next slide, please. So plant counts were also measured at establishment from each of the treatments, and they range from 175 up to 225 plants per metre squared, and they tended just to be a little bit lower where the legume understory was present, so indicating a little bit of competition going on there between the understory and the cash crop. Next slide, please. So quickly moving on to the yield results. So this is a similar graph to what Charlotte showed, and it summarises the differences in yield between the treatments in tonnes per hectare. And so where, as Charlotte was showing, that the error bars represent the 95% confidence intervals, and where those error bars cross the x-axis, there's not a significant difference. So looking at the green bars, the two to the left, where we've got compost versus the control, or compost and a legume versus legume only, we're not seeing any significant difference in yields between those treatments. But on the right, we can see that the legume is significantly reducing crop yields. I'll just take a pause, 1 sec. So here we go. So yeah, we're seeing that the legume reduces crop yields by about 1 tonne per hectare there. And you can see that on the yield map indicated by the red areas on the map. If we go to the next slide, please. Charlotte, I wonder if you could just read this slide out for me.
Yep, no worries. So the
you.
key messages from this are that the legume understory and compost addition had no obvious impact on earthworms or soil structure. The legume understory had a negative effect on the winter wheat yields. Competition for water during spring and summer drought is a potential theory we have there. And compost addition had no effect on yield or worm numbers at this point.
You're a star, thank you. Next slide, please. So moving on to the drainage trial. So this drainage trial is in the 3rd year of being set up. And it's a really unique opportunity to look at the impacts of drains versus no drains, old drains and new drainage, and the drain spacing and the impacts on soil structure and yields. Autumn 2024, as Dave said, was very wet, and in the no drains and the old drains area that's indicated by the 2A and 2B on that map, Dave wasn't able to establish a crop. So immediately we're seeing that the benefit of drainage means you just have the ability to establish a crop. In spring 2024, we could see that soil conditions were particularly wet and that water wasn't moving to the pipe drains. So therefore, in autumn, Dave installed some mould drains to help with that water movement. And you can see where the mould drains were installed by those yellow marks on the map there. Next slide, please. We wanted to see what the impact of the drain spacing was on water table height. So we installed some dip wells. And if you could click, please, I think there's some text to come on this. Thank you. So we installed these dip wells in each of the zones to compare water table height. And you can see that water table height by that diagram is highest at the midpoint between the zone, between the pipe drains. So to keep it consistent, we installed the dip wells at the midpoint between the pipe drains, shown by that red line there. And basically, all a dip well is a perforated pipe, and Dave will go along and just measure the height of the water table with a tape measure, and we record that periodically through the winter. So obviously, where the drains are doing what you want them to do, the water table height will be lower. So go to the next slide, please. So this graph just summarises the measurements of water table height. So the brown line across the top is the soil surface, and then the pipe drains were installed at around 65 centimetres. There was no significant difference between drain spacing with or without moles, so we weren't picking up an effect of the moles in this year. Drainage treatments had a significantly lower water table compared to undrained, which is as we'd expect. And notably, the 10-metre space drains significantly reduced the water table compared to the 15 and the 20-metre spacing. And that was significant on December, January and April. And also there was no significant difference between the 15-metre and the 20-metre spacing. So really it was the 10-metre spacing that was having the most significant impact at reducing those water table heights. But even so, you can see that after heavy periods of rain in January, the water table is very close at the soil surface. So there's really only so much water that these drains can get away from the field. Next slide, please. So moving on to the yield map, and you can see the area there of the no drained and the old drains where we weren't able to drill a crop. So there's insufficient data to statistically compare the yields this year, but the lack of drainage or well-maintained drains just indicates that it's going to cause problems, and it can lead to either total crop failure or just the inability to get a crop in. We've had a very unusual weather conditions. We've been very wet and then going into this drought, and we're expecting that this is causing a lot of variability combined with the soil type as well that we're seeing in the data. Next slide, please. So in the past, we've picked up significant differences between soil texture. So at the bottom of the field in zone 1 is slightly lighter, it's a clay loam, and then the zone 2 is heavier with a clay, and we tend to see that the yields are higher on the clay loam than zone 1 than zone 2, but that wasn't being picked up this year, and it was just the yield was just numerically higher at 0.32 tonnes per hectare compared to that heavier soil texture. So, and there were just areas within the field where we could see that the yield was higher. So if you can see that there indicated by the blue lines, blue dots. So there were higher yields on the north side of zone 1 and along the edge of the drains in zone 2 there. So really it's this sort of combination, this soil variability and dry, wetter than dry, that's having an impact on the yields. Next slide, please. So due to the lack of data on over the different drain spacing, it's not possible to look at the statistically compare the impact of drain spacing. But what we normally do is just look at the average yield over that area, and just see if we can pick out some differences. But really, this year we're not, again, due to that sort of variation, we're not picking out any differences in yield due to drain spacing this year. Next slide, please. And I'll just put this slide together just to summarise the yields that we're seeing across the 3 years and the effects. So in year 1 in 2023, the crop was winter beans, and then in 24 and 25, the fields being in winter wheat. You can see that in year 1, there was a significant effect of new drains over old drains on crop yield, and also a significant effect of new drains versus no drains on yield. And if we compare no drainage to old drains, there was no significant difference. In the second year, we weren't able to statistically compare new drains to old drains, but there was yield on new drains was 0.13 tonnes per hectare higher than old drains. We did see a significant effect of new drains over no drains, and there was insufficient data to compare the no drains versus old drainage in that year. And then, as I've just presented, where we've got old drains or no drainage, we've not been able to establish a crop. So overall, we're seeing across the 3 years the benefit of new drains on crop yield. Next slide, please. So overall, the key messages are that the results show a lack of drainage or lack of well-maintained drains can lead to total crop yield. The challenging weather conditions of waterlogging over winter followed by drought affected crop yields, making it difficult to pick differences. And the dip wells indicated that 10-metre spacing was the most appropriate at significantly reducing water table height. But ultimately, the dip wells indicated that there's only so much water that their drainage systems can get away. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to pass over to Charlotte to carry on.
Thanks, Kate. I'm sorry you're having trouble with your cold. If you could move on to the next slide, please. So we are continuing with Dave Blacker's farm, and so we are having another 3 work packages on farm. We have a repeat of the foliar micronutrients and looking at the impact on yield, but we're doing that in beans this coming season, and we are continuing with the long-term work packages of looking at improving earthworm populations and the very interesting drainage trial. Can you move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So within the Strategic Farm North, we're looking at a number of different fields. The Overton 5 and Overton 4 are going into stewardship. So we'll continue monitoring the drainage trial because it's a long-term one going through the series of years for Strategic Farm North. Overton 4 will have no trial in it. New Farm 4 and New Farm 5 are going into winter beans. New Farm 4 will have the nutrition trial, and in New Farm 5 we'll be monitoring the underlying compost treatment. And Newton 1 will be a second wheat, and we'll be looking at improving earthworms in that one. And I think it's time to hand over to Henny now.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks so much, Charlotte, and thank you also to Kate for making it through, especially with the cough. Really appreciate you taking the time. So yeah, if you do have any questions, please make sure you pop them into the question box. I actually have one. I want to go back to the first work package, Charlotte, if you're happy to jump back in. And I know that you, in your kind of summary of the trial, you alluded to some of the improvements that could be made to the kind of tissue testing process in order to maybe make this active management sort of more efficient. But what kind of other improvements do you think could be made to the system? Is it, you know, when we were looking at the gross margins, we were finding it was less profitable perhaps for this active management approach? Is it the cost of tissue testing? Is it the cost of the products that you have to apply? What are kind of the key areas do you see as being sort of most important to maybe make this reduced fungicide active management approach more economically viable?
So I think for us, we could have been more responsive and quicker off the mark, taking those tissue tests and getting the results back to make those first applications sooner in the season. I think that would have been better. So that's one thing we'll be changing for next season, using the yen nutrition, grain nutrition results to inform first applications. And picking up the differences then. I think in those gross margin calculations, we assumed just one tissue test, which is I think what most people would do. So I don't think that was a large cost. But I think because it was a low disease pressure year, we won't, the opportunity for the effect of the nutrition was smaller. But I would be interested, I think Susie worked up most of these results, so she may have an opinion on that if she's still on the line. And Dave paid for a lot of it, so he might have it. I'll open it up.
Yeah, I would echo what Charlotte said. I think we, in an ideal world, we would have started earlier, because our first foliar nutrition treatments didn't go on until May, I think. So they could have been included in earlier sprays based on the nutrition results. So I hope that without spending much more, we could have increased the yield benefit by doing that.
Yeah, brilliant. Dave, do you have any comments on that as well?
Yeah, I'd agree, and it's not easy. I tried to get a handful of products on stock in advance of knowing what the results were, because I had no idea what nutrients were going to be deficient. So I had a range of different products on shelf ready to go, just to pick out the various nutritional deficiencies that popped up when we got the results back. But from a business point of view, you wouldn't really want to do that. You won't want to buy loads of stuff you might not need, just in case you do. It's a bit of a reverse way of going about it. One thing I would like to say is, from a farmer's point of view, we're quite well informed on how much PK crops want, how much magnesium crops require through the growing season. A lot of that's laid out in RB 209. But if I wanted to correct the copper deficiency we saw later on and increase my copper by 0.6, how much copper would I have to apply to a crop? And we haven't got that data at all for micronutrients. So from my point of view, I have no idea how much of these products I need to put on to correct the deficiencies at the levels we're seeing, which is a big knowledge gap I think we've got.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
We found we did a big review for AHDB a little over 10 years now on all that sort of thing, and the data is just not there from independent trials. A lot of the manufacturers have conducted their own trials, mixture of glasshouse work and field work, but that data is confidential to them, and so there's an element of trust, deciding whether the manufacturers sell the products with recommended rates, and those are based on their own internal trials. But there's an element of trust needed as to whether we think the trials work they've done is sufficient and done well. So it's great to have even this independent trial. It's a start.
Yeah, definitely taking note of that as something that I think AHDB can take away. It's definitely, something that we should be filling that gap if there is one. So yeah, it's really great we've kind of identified that through the trials. We do have another question on the micronutrient applications from Sophie, who's asking if the results suggest that the micronutrient foliar applications would be most beneficial for organic farmers. I don't know whether Charlotte or Susie, you've got any comments on that?
I think they do show that, given that where in a background of nil fungicides, where disease is a bigger problem, we saw a larger and significant yield benefit from the foliar nutrients. So where you can apply fungicides, because you're not growing for organic or wild farmed or anything else, I would apply fungicides. We're not replacing them, but yeah, you're seeing a bigger benefit in that situation.
Yes, yeah, good point. And someone's also made the point at the top that perhaps the yard products may or may not be possible to use in organic systems as well. So I think that's worth bearing in mind.
That is an issue.
Yeah. And also, I suppose, without the nitrogen applications that you also wouldn't get in an organic system, you may have a slightly different disease pressure if you're not applying, 200 kg nitrogen.
Disease pressures are usually higher in where the crop is sufficiently fertilized with nitrogen. So we weren't testing it in an organic situation. It'd be worth. I'd recommend anyone running their own simple trials, put a few tram lines with and without to see what happens in their own situation.
Absolutely. Fab. So just moving on from the micronutrients temporarily and onto the living mulch. Someone has asked about the SMN results in that living mulch trial, about how there was no significant difference in the SMN between August and February when there was a legume, but there was a decrease in SMN when that legume was absent. Does this indicate there was more leaching of nitrogen from the non-legume strips in the fields, or can that not be concluded from the data? Was that question clear enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, it's a good question. I don't think we'd expect leaching. It could be leaching, yeah, but it's most likely that it could be taken up by the crop as well. Really, it's hard to say without doing those measurements what the fate is of that nitrogen. Really, I would say, Henny, overall, yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, and yeah, sort of sticking with the Clover understory, and a question about the difference in worm numbers between the plots. And also, there wasn't really a huge difference between those two strips. Someone was asking about the compost and whether it was green waste compost, and talking about whether you might see differences if you're comparing against FYM or poultry muck or chopped straw, for example.
Yes, it was green waste compost. It was properly treated cut stuff that all the weed seeds killed off in it. So it was quite a good compost. I have had compost before that haven't been treated properly and ended up with a weed problem from them. But this was from a better source. I think FYM probably would be better from a worm point of view, from a worm feeding point of view. I haven't got any livestock, so it would be a case of bringing it in from somebody else. And it's looking around my local area, wondering who's got the cleanest. Who's using the cleanest straw, that I'm not going to then import a load of browns or black grasses onto what is quite a clean block of land. So that's why I chose to go the compost on first. Muck would be better, but it's just finding a clean source of muck.
Yeah, absolutely. Kate, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that one.
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, it's making use of what organic materials you've got available, really. But yes, and as Dave said, you would probably expect a better response with the farmyard manure. But yeah, Dave was using what was easily available.
Brilliant. We've had a couple of questions come through about the sort of cost benefit analysis in the drainage trial, and sort of talking about what is the kind of time scale that we're looking at in terms of paying back the cost of installing the drainage, obviously the different drain spacings and the cost of putting the mold drains in, for example. So we've sort of discussed it as a team about looking at this over a longer period. Obviously it's only been in for a couple of years, but what in terms of the cost benefit analysis, is this something that, you know, we're going to be comparing, and how easy is that going to be to compare the different spacings and systems?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that, yeah, we've been talking about doing. We made a start at it after the first year of doing some back of the envelope estimates. But I think our ambition would be at the end of the strategic farm to look at the multiple yield map data that we've got, and use what the information of costs and labour that Dave's got, and start making sort of estimates there for the time back period. But it, you know, it's going to be a long time, isn't it, Dave? I think from what we were looking at, 10 plus years, if not more, really.
Yeah, well, from what it's a difficult thing to say exactly what benefit you get in an increase in yield. You know, you can take some areas of a field that yield nothing and take them to, you know, a field average, which is a massive benefit, and would pay back relatively quickly. This field is a particularly challenging field. It's a bane of my life, actually. One of my worst fields on a farm. I think the field 5-year average is about just under 7 tons a hectare. So it's one of the lowest yielding fields that I've got already. And one of the purposes we set this trial up like we have to start with was to try and see if there was a difference between 20 metre centres, 15 and 10, and whether there was a benefit of spending the extra amount of money. Because the advice we've been given from industry or research before is that 20 metre centres is the most economically viable width to be putting drains in at. So it was a kind of a way of challenging that, given, you know, we've got global warming and rain that seems to come down in inches, not millimetres. Whether 20 metres was still a significant width to be spending the money on. But obviously, when you're cutting that down and going to 10, it's costing you twice as much. There's twice as much pipe in the ground, twice as much stone. So there is a massive difference in the cost from doing a 20 metre and doing a 10 metre system in a field. Which I have got the costs of that. I have worked them out. So, but that was certainly part of the reason why we set the trial up like we did.
Yeah, and we discussed at the latest steering group meeting about it being an extreme of the extremes field, and that perhaps in fields that are challenging, but perhaps not quite to that extent, that perhaps, you know, drainage might have a different effect. And, you know, we saw it with the dip wells, you know, getting right to the water table, even with the 10 metre spacing. So yeah, it's up there as one of the wettest fields. So yeah, I think that's a good point. But yeah, we'll obviously keep you updated over the next few years on what the kind of cost benefit analysis is looking like. I just want to jump back quickly to the legume understory work package. And obviously, you know, we saw a yield penalty in the clover understory, which I think is a fairly common finding when people try this approach. Is there a way that we can better manage that clover to kind of reduce that yield loss, or is this a sort of inevitable outcome of trying to use these practices? And it sort of follows up, kind of leads into a question from Christopher's, talking about perhaps the continuation of that legume understory for the following crop. Might there be an advantage there? I know that for this coming season, we're going to be putting that legume understory field into a second wheat and maintaining that legume understory. So whether you think we might see a sort of legacy advantage of that clover understory.
Yeah, if I start and you take over, Dave. I mean, I guess it's just 1 year's worth of data for us really on this, and it was an exceptionally dry summer. So we did see that competition. We believe what we're seeing with the yield reductions is a competition for water. So depending on whether next year we can see whether that same effect is picked up, or, you know, whether there are different pressures. So we'll have to see. And then really, I guess there is inevitability that there will be competition for some sort of competition, really. So it is really about managing that. And I think, Dave, you felt that it was getting a bit big this autumn and considering topping it, but you were able to drill without doing that. Was that right?
Yeah, it's gone in. So the second week's established now. It looks quite well, actually. It's gone in fine.
Yeah.
I mean, the Clover was a bit challenging to get established to start with. We did it in 24 when it was a fallow, and I tried once in the autumn, and that failed. So I had to do it again in the spring. And because it was a fallow field, not only did the clover come, but we had quite a lot of sour thistle and mayweed and groundsel forevermore flowering all over the field. So we ended up topping the plots before I could drill the first winter wheat crop that we've just seen the results of. So that's why the VEST score was worse where the understory was, because it's had so much traffic over it, drilling it twice and then pasture topping it before that wheat crop went in. That's the reason behind the VEST score getting worse in that particular plot. So I am trying really hard not to kill it, so we can continue this go into the next crop. I'm hoping flea beetle populations, pending that the crop after wheat will be an oilseed grape crop, but we'll have to see. We'll see what the flea beetle populations are like locally. But the intention is to keep it in as long as I can without killing it off. But it has. We have had a few dicey moments already. There's not a lot you can put on a clover. Most of the stuff that we used to be able to use has been banned now, so you're very limited in what you can actually use on it that won't kill it, which means you have to put up with groundsel flowering, nice sea of white in them 2 plots, and then when that stopped flowering, the mayweed started, so it was a nice sea of yellow. So if that's organic farming, it was probably doing my head in for last season. Watching all these weed seeds go to seed, and you see the weed seed bank building back open, and it's probably not for me, organic farming. I think I'd rather sell it.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you ever told me you were going to become an organic farmer, I'd send someone around to make sure you're okay. I'd be very surprised. So we've just got 2 minutes left, and there's still lots of questions coming in. So we'll just sort of try and quick fire through a couple of others before we finish. We've got one here which is about actually next year's trials in the beans, and which nutrients are we intending to use on those beans? So what will be your sort of farm standard active management for that trial?
I don't usually do a great deal with beans at all. I just let them do the thing. Sometimes put manganese on, but that will probably be it. So yeah, I wasn't. Other than that, I wasn't intending on doing anything to them.
Mm-hmm. But for the active management, that will be based on
active
tissue testing.
Active management will come down again. It will come down to what we test as being deficient in the leaves, and reacting to that. We had to try and get a bit of P&K on over the plots. We're hoping to do that at establishment, but it hasn't happened yet. Now we're going to wait for a frost before I can travel on it. So the active management, hopefully we'll get a bit of not much, but a bit of phosphate and potash applied to it before the spring, and then react to whatever else we see through the leaf tests.
Yeah, brilliant. Charlotte, I'm guessing that's what you.
Yes, I was just about to say that we were going to follow on from what we're seeing in the grain and finding the deficiencies this season, so that we can preempt starting that active management sooner, and then the tissue tests, get those done quickly.
Yeah, perfect.
It was interesting in what we saw in the wheat trial this year, and that we were aware that P&K were deficient in the wheat crop, and even though we tried to correct that with liquid foliar products, when you actually work out how much nutrient we were applying to that crop, it was only 1 to 2% of the PK requirement for the whole crop that we were actually delivering. So there's no wonder we weren't correcting the P&K deficiencies. And had I achieved it, I would have probably gone bankrupt in the process, or have to travel so many times through the crop to get 40-50 kilos of PK on the crop. It's just not possible in the liquid form.
Yeah, so if
Yeah.
you can manage to get on before spring, that would be helpful, Dave.
Yeah. And it's been recorded now, so you have to do it. I'm really sorry. I know there are still a few more questions left in the chat, but we do have to wrap up there. Any questions that we haven't had time for, I'll make sure that they are addressed and made available to anyone that's registered for the webinar. So don't worry, we will answer them at some point. So I just want to say thank you so much to Kate, Susie, Charlotte and David for presenting and for answering a whole raft of questions, and thank you to everyone for watching and for asking such brilliant questions as well. So we're going to wrap it up there, but yeah, thanks everyone for joining us.